Okay, so today we are going to talk about pollinator habitat and kind of prepping as we get ready to enter the spring season and getting ready for those pollinators. Just a quick reminder. So my name is Sarah Havens. I'm a field specialist in natural resources. And what is Women Owning Woodlands? This is our program that's being developed to provide learning opportunities to women landowners. We've got some field days, lunch and learns, and classes that we gear toward women's forest landowners and enthusiasts. And then we do have a Facebook page that provides those networking opportunities and a place to come with questions. Just some upcoming events, and I should delete it off. Today is actually the tree sugaring workshop at Wordak, and tomorrow is our Women Owning Woodland Timber Sale workshop that's here at Wordak. I think the registration's closed, but if anyone was still interested, I can take registration tomorrow at the door. So that one's from 9 to 2 here at the farm. February 22nd through March 8th, we have a 3-part series for woodland stewards. This is all on the web, so it's all through Zoom. First one will be talking about carbon markets. Second one is forest health. And then the last one is going to cover wildlife habitat, but for some of our smaller habitats, such as amphibians and kind of smaller birds and songbirds and that type of habitat. And then February 26th is a general timber sale workshop that's in Lebanon. And then I should have put on here also March 4, 5, and 6, the National Women Owning Woodland group is going to have a online conference. So it's the evening of Thursday and Friday. And then for our time, it's 11 to 1 on that Saturday. So if you're interested, that'll cover kind of a wide range of topics. And then there are breakout sessions by region. So again, we're kind of in the Midwest. So we would break out with the Midwest group, but it is national. So it's across the country and completely free. Registration for that is completely free. So that's kind of some of the upcoming events. Hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll have some knowledge of native pollinators, know how to plant native pollinator habitat and ideas for plants that are good for pollinators. So we are starting to just get into that season. Oh yes, Laura, great question about giving you the link. I will throw that in the chat at the end of the presentation or in the Q&A section. So don't let me forget that. At the end, again, so also talk about plants that are good for pollinators today. So native pollinators, oftentimes we don't necessarily know what's native, what's not. Bumblebees, our mason and our other solitary bees. These are ones that they're going to use mud for nest construction. They usually are solitary, or the female builds her own nest, lays her eggs. So these are, again, not our typical bees that we think of for honey production. They're going to be, we have lots of other species of bees that act as pollinators that are not in that honeybee grouping. Also, native pollinators, we have a lot of butterflies and moths. This is the Lepidoptera order if you're an entomologist. There's 180,000 described species across the country. Difference, so this is a question I get a lot about butterflies versus moths. So butterflies have wings that are upright and perpendicular to body axis, and they are generally active during the day. Then moths, they actually hold their wings flat over their body, and they tend to be more active at night or at dusk. What are some native pollinators? Again, some that we have here. Flies are also in the native pollinator category. Flies, gnats, even mosquitoes. So it is female mosquitoes that tend to use human blood as a feeding source, but male mosquitoes actually do not bite us at all. And they will feed on plant and flower nectar as a food source. So they do also act as pollinators. And then our flies, they aren't as efficient as bees for carrying pollen, but again, they still act as pollinators. And one species of particular interest in Missouri that requires or that relies a lot on fly pollinators is our pawpaw trees. So pawpaw actually has more of a putrid smell to it. And I tell you this, it's a good time to get to prep for this because pawpaws will start flowering next month. And so again, preparation for our fly pollinators, but it smells terrible and flies are more attracted to it than our other insects that are pollinators, such as moths, butterflies. And also because pawpaw flowers fairly early, a lot of our pollinators, they aren't kind of out of their winter hibernation to do pollination for those early flowering plants, and flies tend to come out much earlier. So even this week, probably we had a couple days in mid 50s. Next week, we're going to have a couple days in the mid to lower 60s, and you will start to see those flies come out the first. So these are some of the first pollinators. So it's important for us to think about habitat for, and usually flies don't need much in the way of habitat. So they tend to lay their eggs in the soil or any type of place where there might be decaying material. They'll lay eggs and which turn into maggots, and they feed on decaying material and hatch out from that. So again, not worried too much about fly habitat, but they are important in the pollinator world. Why are pollinators important? So pollinators are required for pollination of 2/3 of our world's plants. If you are a gardener or you have native plants, you'll know that it's important that they have pollination for reproduction. And if you're a gardener for fruit and vegetable production, pollinators are very important. Most of our insects unwittingly pollinate plants while foraging for nectar and pollen. So it's not that they necessarily go out with this as their main task. They are foraging for things like nectar and that pollen for food, and so they will unknowingly do this. Bees are the only ones that collect the pollen piece for eating, and they are responsible for 90% of our world's pollination. But this includes not just, again, we think about honeybees that make honey, and we have in hives, and we can, many people keep bees, which is great. So this really contributes to pollination, and even can contribute to pollination of our native plants. But lots of other bees out there, such as the mason bees, bumblebees. And so we want to make things and habitat and prepare for them in ways that is beneficial to our native bees as well. So this can include things like some thinking about mixing up what we plant in our garden. So sometimes it's good to look at when things flower. And if you can provide things that are flowering kind of early spring, mid-spring, throughout the entire growing season and time that we would expect these pollinators, that can be very beneficial for those native species. Some advice we give is, especially to homeowners that have kind of yards that they maintain, is when the dandelions start to pop up, or the violets, sometimes seen as weeds in our more suburban yards, if we can leave those for just at least a little bit, this provides a food source oftentimes early in the spring for our pollinators. There's approximately 100 crop species that provide 90% of our food supplies for 146 countries. 71 of those crop species are bee pollinated. And mostly this is by actually non-native, non-managed bees. So you'll see sometimes orchards will actually bring beehives in to help with pollination, because this is going to improve upon fruit setting. But really, actually, most pollination of our crop species is going to come from our native, non-managed bees. So it's really important that we provide them good habitat. Just quick covering like what each of these types of pollinators utilize. So bumblebees, they are a generalist forager. So they are going to look for flowers that any type of flower. They usually prefer habitat with more coarse vegetation and natural debris. They like to nest in cavities, so places that have like voles and mole activity. I know not something we always want to encourage in our yard, But we'll tend to find bumblebees kind of on the edge of like natural habitats in our yards. And so this is a good, this provides great habitat for them. In preparation for bumblebees, we should, one, kind of leave, they like to nest under vegetation or debris. So they are a species that benefits when we don't rake leaves, when we don't kind of disturb the vegetation during the winter, because that's where they will overwinter. And then to prep for them, continual access to food sources is what's necessary. So having those flowers, having a variety of flowers that are available to them throughout the growing season is important. And if you can come up with a variety of flowering plants that last all summer, this is what's, again, most beneficial to them. So again, here's a list of bumblebee habitat. So things that they prefer. All of these are natives that I have listed here. They will utilize our cultivated, non-native flowers that we have in our gardens, such as petunias and pansies and whatever else we put out there. But these are the natives that they like. So they're, again, generalists. They don't necessarily have one particular species that they need in order to survive. Putting out habitat. So you can actually create artificial habitat for them. So a container with some nesting material. So this can be like, this is just one example using an upside down flower pot, some like pine needles or leaf material. You can kind of, or mossy material even in there. And then this hose pipe entrance replicates like a native tunnel that a rodent would make, for example. And you can put these out in early spring in preparation for them, and they will use this kind of as a resting spot, a place to hide. So again, very beneficial for them if you think about something that might attract more bumblebees. There are several bumblebees actually that just got listed on the endangered species list, and so we are very conscious of our bumblebees and the numbers that we have. Mason and other solitary bees, so they like natural habitat, so mud cells in small tunnels. Sometimes they'll use hollow plant stems, and they are species that if you can leave some of your standing dead plant material that has those, so like asters and solidago, if you can leave those throughout the winter, they will utilize those hollow plant stems as habitat. They also really like dead and decaying wood and plants. So again, unkempt areas, kind of those marginal areas between natural habitat and perhaps yards or mowed areas. This is a good place to encourage them. And good habitat for them is going to provide blossoming plants from early spring to fall. So again, they're going to be active in here in Missouri pretty much from early spring all the way until they overwinter. And so that will help maintain a large population. These are also bees that will utilize the like pollinator like tubes, and then we put smaller cells in there, and they will utilize those tunnels as well for habitat. Flowers for them that they like. So again, early spring, they take advantage of a lot of our early spring flowers. So redbud, dogwood, hazelnut, fruit trees, all of those are beneficial for those mason and solitary bees. Then asters, black-eyed peas, and bee balm coneflowers. Again, they're kind of a generalist, very similar to a bumblebee. And important for them is just that they have some of that like dead woody material for them to overwinter and for them to utilize during the spring into the summer. Plant flowers in larger section and group together one or more type of flowers. So again, variety is usually the key for our pollinators. There's the artificial, I jumped the gun talking about the artificial habitat. So these are pretty easy to make and can be very beneficial to these types of bees. Again, this is a common design. I know with our 4-H students, we use PVC pipe, and we'll kind of do the same thing with cardboard straws. And it's good to have a variety of sizes of these tubes. And this does great in an area with water and mature trees, shrubs, and vegetation nearby. So not too out in the open or even in bright sun because it can overheat them. And so kind of find a shady spot for that. And you can put those nests about 3 feet above the ground on a vertical surface. So this one is hung by rope. Butterflies and moths. So they use a wide variety of flowering plants, and our butterflies and our moths tend to be a little bit more specific to which plants they prefer. And so it's good if you kind of have an idea of butterflies and moths that you want to attract. You can research which plants for specific species. So for example, Luna moths, so those great big green moths that we have, they usually show up like mid to late summer. They only eat on sweet gum trees and maple trees. So if you want that type of moth present, having the specific species for them is beneficial. You'll have more butterfly species and moth species the larger variety of plant species that you have. And again, variety where we can kind of have them mature, have flowers that flower at different times a year. That provides the best habitat for a diverse population. A sugar maple for the Luna moths is their preferred, along with the sweet gum. So again, here's just some example of some native flower species that can attract different butterflies and moths. We're probably almost familiar with milkweed because of its, I lost my train of thought, because of monarch caterpillars. So they're kind of the face of pollinators, but we do have a lot of other species of butterflies and moths that are throughout Missouri. And milkweed, there's a variety of different milkweeds that you can plant. And I'll tell you how beneficial they are, not just to monarch caterpillars, but also to a lot of other pollinator species. So we have swamp milkweed, and it was a great surprise to me when we first planted it, how many other species of insects and butterflies and moths that used our milkweed. So we will see at any given time probably 10 to 15 different species of insect pollinators that are utilizing those milkweed flowers. And then we have the caterpillars that eat the green part of it. So again, very beneficial in that it is multiple parts of it are utilized by pollinators. Also on here are the cone flowers. The columbine, cardinal flower, liatris is a big one for butterflies and moths, and it will bloom kind of like mid-July. Butterfly weed, penstemon, asters. Asters are good if you're, again, kind of thinking about what to put out for habitat. Asters are a great choice because they flower very late into the season. So in fact, we had such a mild fall, early winter that I still saw asters flowering in mid-December until we had those harder frosts. So that's a great one for kind of late in the season. Sassafras is another. So I put sassafras and parsley on here. So there's 2 species of butterfly that are particular to these plant species. And I won't remember their names today, but they are 2 really good plants for those particular species of butterfly. You can also put out some artificial habitat. So even like early in the season, late in the summer, early fall, and sometimes even late fall, like this past fall, we kind of had that weird, prolonged season. And so you can help out migrating butterflies or just start some of our local native butterflies by putting out things like butterfly houses. So this gives them a resting area that's safe from predators. You can put water out for them. So, and this is a good feature, again, if you're thinking about any type of insect or other wildlife utilizing your garden space that you've planted. Water is always a good source to have. So this can be like a bird bath. It can be some other type of water feature. but all of our insects do utilize water in some, we don't think about them as drinking it as much as our other animal species, but they do need it. And so it's good to have it present. Another thing you can do for butterflies and moths is put out rotten fruit. So things like old bananas, rotten apples, so you cut them open so they can access that decaying fruit. And this is a good source of nutrients and food for them. So, and again, I think of this kind of early in the season when we perhaps don't have as much flowering and so many things available for them. You can put it out, and then late in the season when they're like monarchs are migrating, or perhaps we have some kind of the end of that season of that species. Fly habitat, I said kind of at the beginning, no need to create habitat for these guys. One thing you can do to benefit fly species is a reduction of pesticides and not spraying as much around for pesticide reduction. This will keep you plenty of flies to pollinate those flowers that we perhaps rely on them for. Anyway, thinking about pollinator habitat ideas, I know this is a good time. I'm getting all my garden catalogs, and I always say that there's the only good thing about January some years is those garden seed catalogs coming in the mail. It's like that ray of sunshine this time of year. But think about planting your garden and think like a pollinator. So things that are important to pollinators, especially our native pollinators, is they have evolved to utilize native plants. So if you're putting in new pollinator beds, think about native plants first. And they generally need less water than our ornamental plants. Kind of just go through this diagram, be showy. So a lot of our pollinators are attracted to flowers. So the more flowers we can have, and thinking about trying to start early spring all the way through winter, through late fall, is definitely beneficial. Plant big patches of each species close together. So this helps with foraging efficiency. So if you have a species that only utilizes one species of plant, they find it all in one area, which is better for them. Be patient if you're planting natives, especially. So if you plant stuff this year, some of it might flower, but don't be patient for it to establish itself. So a lot of times our natives will work on, because a lot of our natives here are kind of prairie species, they're going to work on establishing their roots first, and then they're going to work on above ground. So usually the first year or two, they're establishing themselves underground, and they will catch up after a couple of years, but just be patient with them. Being gentle, most of our pollinators, particularly our bees, especially our native like mason bees and solitary bee species, don't sting as readily as other bee species. And so, just be gentle around them, and they probably won't sting you. Bumblebees very rarely sting folks. So again, just think about that. Diversity, so planting a variety of species. So I just talked about putting them in clusters, but having multiple species throughout your pollinator bed is definitely beneficial for pollinators. Joke about being a little messy. So leaving stuff in the garden is okay. I know I get to fall and I'm always ready to clean everything up. And it does take a little bit of the opposite of discipline to leave all those things in the garden so that there's hollowed out stems and there's habitat for the overwintering pollinators to hang out into. So that's always good. Be homey. So again, leaving branches, leaving piles of things, providing just, again, habitat for them to overwinter, to rest in during the summer. Those are all really good places. And like our ground bees, they like to find places to go underneath so they can lay eggs and perpetuate themselves. Be sunny. So again, provide sunny areas, provide some open soil. So this actually is a place for them to rest and soak up some sunlight. This is beneficial, especially for butterflies and moths. They like to soak up a little bit of sunlight. So it's okay to have some of those bare patches for them. Be aware, so observe your pollinators when you're outside. So this is a really fun part of having pollinator habitat, is observing those species. So we have just, my family in general, we've had a lot of fun with adding to our pollinator habitat, and each year trying to kind of add a couple more plants and a couple different species just to see what else we can find and what's going to be attracted to it. And one thing that I was so surprised by my swamp milkweed was hummingbird moths. So up until I had the swamp milkweed, I'd never seen a hummingbird moth. And so that was really exciting and just, something new for us to see. If you can avoid using pesticides and herbicides around your pollinator habitat, this is a good habit. So unfortunately, this does usually bring in some of the bad with the good. So I know my milkweed in particular, it tends to get aphids really heavily, but I don't ever spray it because I don't want to damage any of my young monarch caterpillars for the future. So again, if we can avoid chemicals and come up with other ways to kind of manage things. So aphids in particular are big milkweed pests. So I will do things like kind of go out and just actually wipe the aphids off. It's a little more time consuming than if I were to spray chemicals, but definitely more pollinator friendly. So again, just some other habitat ideas. It's not for everybody, these types of habitat for pollinators, because it sometimes looks messy, might make the neighbors look at us. I'm lucky I don't actually have a lot of neighbors, so we can put out things. I don't have anything quite like this, but we can leave things looking a little bit messy from time to time for our pollinators. So in hard habits, some of our hard habits die hard, because I know for me it's been hard. We don't rake leaves anymore in the fall, so we leave all the leaves where they fall. Again, that's beneficial for pollinators. And then after things warm up, flowers have started to come out and the pollinators have probably emerged, then I'll clean up my dead leaves. Again, small things help too. So providing kind of varied pollinator plantings around your house and your property are definitely very beneficial. Even things like just a small planter can be a benefit to those pollinators. It can kind of break up their area. So especially if they're migratory pollinators. Okay, any questions today? I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to grab that National WOW link and throw it in the chat box. Is everybody ready for spring and for the butterflies and moths to come back? Yeah. Yes, Laura, for sure. Lots of smiling faces. I know that I get antsy. Yes. And these days, especially I think tomorrow we're supposed to be like 32, but then Monday and Tuesday 60s. So it's like, ready to get out there and get started. I'm told by our horticulturists not to get too excited and put stuff out too early. So, but it is a good time, especially since native plants do tend to start to sell out a little bit quicker. So it's a good time to put in orders for native plant species, and sometimes Go Native, their website, and through the Missouri, you can get to their website through the Missouri Prairie Foundation. You can oftentimes find native plant sales. And I know, again, I'm in the Rolla area, and so the master naturalists in my area do a native plant sale in the spring. Oh, don't be in panic mode. So it is a good time to start thinking about stratifying seeds, and we'll probably have one more snow this time of year. If we had like this snowstorm, would have been great for if you had a large area that you were going to throw seeds out. Sometimes sowing on top of the snow is good for some of our natives, because as it melts, it'll kind of take them into the soil below. So good time to do that. Again, if you're planting anything that needs stratification, make sure you're looking at that as far as if it needs to be held at a certain temperature for amount of time. I think in March, I'll also bring Gatlin Bunton on. He's one of our agronomy specialists, and he is fantastic at native plants and propagating native plants. So I'll have him on to talk about different species of natives and what we do for their seeds in order to get them to grow, because he's very knowledgeable about that. And so if you do have those seeds and they need something, I don't have anything off the top of my head for native pollinator seeds, but I can point you in some right directions. Missouri Prairie Foundation is fantastic. So they kind of oversee our the Go Native network. Here's for the National Women Owning Woodland Conference. And you can register for single days. You don't have to register for the whole thing. You can do just Thursday night or just Friday night or Saturday, or you can register for all of them. I will be presenting at the Saturday conference. So I'll be talking about tree serping and cultivating mushrooms on that day. So, but there'll be tons of other like wildlife habitat, timber sales, all sorts of non-timber forest products. So lots of different talks. And then let me throw up resources for finding native plants as well. Okay, yeah, here's Go Native. And on that site, they have a couple different resources. So you can look at workshops or events, and that is where I tend to find my native plant sales around the area. So if they haven't listed many yet, it doesn't look like, but they should eventually. Also, if you're looking for places to buy, they have a link that has where you can buy native plants. There's several great places around the state, and they have a map. And I can share my screen and let you see that as well. Yep, Missouri Wildfire is a great place to purchase. Say that is just south of Jeff City, and you can order online or go in person. If you go in person, it's dangerous, or at least it is for me. There's a lot of stuff that looks beautiful that needs to come home with me. So yes, a great place. And here I'm going to share my screen because it's on the Go Native site if you click on where to find, but just to let you see what it looks like. They do have this map that you can see here that has locations that you can find native plants for sale. So again, good place. They also have this native plant database. So I know sometimes people will ask about, you know, like if you're looking for a particular color that goes into a garden, that database can help you find native plants that fit that need. Anything else today? So next week, I'm actually going to present about tree sugaring, and we will talk about how to go about that process of collecting sap and making it into syrup. Kind of a 30,000 foot view, but I'll give you enough to be dangerous if you want to try for yourself. Yeah. Any other questions today? All right. Well, thanks for joining me. Have a great weekend. Oh, what trees are the best? Any trees are really, so early spring flowering trees are fantastic. Redbuds, dogwood, um, they're really good. Right now, actually, if you look, especially in riparian areas, witch hazel is actually flowering right now. It's another one that a lot of like our fly pollinators will pollinate. Um, and then hazelnut is another one that has a lot of pollen. So it has kind of these long catkins. So those are good ones. Oh, were you asking me about tapping? I was going back to pollinators. Tapping, maple is good if you have them, which in Missouri, it tends to follow the Missouri and Mississippi River areas. I actually tap black walnut. So that is what I've been doing most of my tapping on is black walnut trees. But you can tap several different species. They kind of produce differing amounts of sap with a differing sugar concentration. And so black walnut is probably second to maples as far as sugar content. So usually it's about 50 to 1 ratio for the black walnut. It sounds always depressing, but it's okay to make little pint jars at a time. So essentially it'd be 50 gallons to 1 gallon of syrup. But you'd be surprised how much you collect. So, but then also sycamores can be tapped. They're not great producers. And box elder, so it's in the maple family. You can actually tap a box elder and collect sap from that. And then one I've not done at all is birch. But in Alaska, they tap birch and make like a wintergreen-esque syrup. So, yep. Black walnut is I'm hoping to be very popular in Missouri because we have a lot of black walnuts and not as many maples. So, but we'll talk more next week. All right. Have a great rest of the week. I'll send a reminder plus the recording.